Welcome to the Daily Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings.com. I'm your host, Josh Hayes, joined as always by my co-host, Renee Miller. You can always find Renee's work over at ProFootballFocus.com along with ESPN, Roto-World, and you can follow her on Twitter at ReneeMiller01, and you can catch me on Twitter as well at JoshHayesFS. Renee, welcome to Week 16.
I can't believe we're almost done with the regular season.
Yeah, it feels like it flew by, doesn't it? I feel like we were here, talking to Bales, like right around week 1, not too long ago. And, we could be like a month away from like the total DFS action wrapping up here. So I guess
we still have NBA.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, for NFL. Yeah, NBA isn't going anywhere. So that's just getting started. So yeah, we definitely still have that. But for PFF purposes, unless they're going to come out with an NBA package, we've got a month left, I think, here. So I guess we're going to try to make the most of it here. Before we get all started here with our lineup breakdown and our positional analysis, we have to let you know that the NFL and the DFS playoffs are in full swing. It feels like they've been going on all season long here at DraftKings.com. Thanks to 1 week fantasy here, with millions given away each week. Every play and every game could take you to a closer, life-changing payday. This isn't fantasy as usual. This is DraftKings. Welcome to the big time. Hurry to DraftKings now and use the promo code PFF to play for free with your first deposit in the Sunday's $1 million fantasy football contest. That's promo code PFF for free entry right now this week over at DraftKings.com. That's DraftKings.com. All right, Renee, we're going to go ahead and start off right off the top like we always do at the quarterback position here. There's a little bit of hot debate with a couple of shows that I've done here this week with, Cam Newton being the top price option. We know that he's been absolutely rolling, and it's another good matchup against Atlanta. But then you've got Big Ben, who's sort of inserted himself into that top tier. And then as my new buddy Britt Devine likes to call Bortle Combat, Blake Bortles here is a really good option, and maybe perhaps one of the best matchups on the board against New Orleans, and the cheapest of the three at 6,500. So how are you sorting out the top options at QB this week?
Yeah, your new friend Britt's my neighbor just down the thruway in New York, in Syracuse.
Nice.
I'm with Britt. I think Bortles is the best cash game play. Second to Bortles is Ben. I would put Cam Newton somewhere beyond that. Atlanta's a good running matchup, so it bodes well for his ground game, but they're not the best passing defense. They should probably who's their good quarter, Trufant? Try to take Tugden out of the action, and that doesn't leave a whole lot to be desired in terms of like Funchess and Cotchery. So I'm a little bit more down on Cam Newton's passing game this weekend.
Yeah, I sort of talked to us a little bit on Grinders Live yesterday here. The Pittsburgh Steelers have 3 quarterback matchups in the top 50 according to Mike Clay's wide receiver quarterback chart. So 2 in the top 25. Marcus Wheaton puts them 3 in the top 50. Carolina, on the other hand, only has Jericho Cotchery with a plus matchup, but Jericho Cotchery is like third. Yeah, it's Jericho Cotchery, so third banana by far. If you were telling me it was, Ted Ginn or something like that, I'd feel a little bit better about it. But I have them. I actually have Cam 2, Big Ben 1, and I think, but for overall value, Blake Bortles is probably going to be my choice in the majority of the cash games there, because he's going to open up some serious salary, especially if you want to get a guy like Antonio Brown into your lineup or some of these other top price options. So I like the flexibility in terms of what he offers on DraftKings. Now let's talk about outside this top tier. We didn't even mention Russell Wilson, who's still been having a ridiculously good season. He probably has the worst matchup among these 3 or 4 quarterbacks that we talked about here. How are you treating the guys just outside that elite range that we just spoke of?
Yeah, I like Wilson. I wrote him up in the Contrarian Plays article that I do at Roto-World. We almost got a cat sighting. Blocked. I wrote up Wilson because I think he's at the point where his price has risen, particularly on FanDuel, to the point where people are like, he can't be this good again. But he is at home, and St. Louis has allowed some big passing games over the past few weeks. Overall, they're good, but I think Russell Wilson and Seattle are better. So I think talent trumps matchup in this case. So I think Wilson is still very usable. I'd only use him in a tournament, and I think that his ownership will be lower than probably his production warrants. So
yeah, I agree with you there as well. I mean, he's been absolutely matchup proof over the past 4 weeks here. So, or maybe 5 weeks. And, Doug Baldwin, maybe this is the week where the regression finally comes for him. But I think a lot of people sort of picked 1 week too early to sort of jump off the train because they thought they're like, okay, it can't happen 4 weeks or 5 weeks in a row. And actually, the 2 touchdowns was his low water mark of the past month, but you still got value and he was still reasonably priced. So, and we'll talk about him once we get to wide receivers here in a little bit. But I want to slide farther down here because there's some interesting options in that 5K range or, low 6, like Matthew Stafford against San Francisco. We've got Derek Carr at home against San Diego. People do have questions about Ryan Fitzpatrick and, them having to pass a ton to keep pace with New England. Are any of those viable GPP plays for you?
I think they're all viable GPP plays. I would add Tyrod Taylor and Teddy Bridgewater to the mix too, based on partially on matchup, partially on the argument that there's not a good ground game in either of those scenarios to fall back on, and you could expect maybe a little bit of increased passing volume from Bridgewater and potentially Taylor too. So, yeah, I'm fine with all of those that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Tyrod Taylor there. I didn't want to intentionally leave him out. He was another guy who just you weren't crazy. It wasn't like the best play on the board, elite matchup. And he was always like reasonably priced. You just had to decide whether or not you could step out, and it turned out to be productive. I think he had a top 6 performance at the quarterback position, and he's just like a guy that once he got out of value town and got a little bit more at an elevated price point, so people started sort of like, okay, I can go cheaper below him, or I don't want to fade some of the top options up there, but still very reasonably priced against the Dallas Cowboys at home at 5,500 on DraftKings. Another guy I'm sort of going to look at as like for a stack here is Jay Cutler to Alshon Jeffrey this week. Tampa Bay defense, we know that they're been pretty bad all season long, so you can definitely expose them in the passing game there as well. And I believe, if I'm correct, still last overall by a hair over the New Orleans Saints as the worst pass coverage unit in the NFL. And there are actually 32nd below Jacksonville and below New Orleans. So everybody thinks it's New Orleans, and we're splitting hairs here. They're both really, really bad. So, you can take advantage of either matchup or both matchups in a GPP. But if, to be exact about the point here, Jay Cutler may have the actual best, pass coverage unit to pass against in week 16. So that's the way I look at this information shaking out. All right, we're going to move forward here. Any other?
One more bottom barrel play, Jimmy Clausen against Pittsburgh. You can also throw on Pittsburgh there. I'm going to say,
I think they were 28th last time I looked.
8th in terms of, you use PFF's gradings, which I don't, because they don't always correlate very well with, not that I don't use them, but they don't always correlate directly with fantasy production. So I also use the fantasy points allowed to position when I'm making these kind of arguments. And Pittsburgh's pretty high. I think they're maybe 10th in terms of allowing the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. And Clausen is coming off a reasonably good fantasy game against Kansas City. He didn't do much against Seattle, but those are 2 really, really difficult matchups. So I think he will have a little bit of an easier go, and we know that they're going to have to throw.
Yeah, you know what? And I'm glad that you mentioned that too. You're one of the people that got me on to fantasy football points against by position there as well. So yeah, plus matchup for Jimmy Clausen there as well. And I'm actually, he's super cheap. So if you're going to go that route, that's fine. And the great thing about it is you can create the hookup with Kamar Aiken, who I also like as a cheap option, and you still open up so much salary for you to get a top wide receiver, maybe an upper tier running back in your lineup there as well. So I like that stack. I'm glad you mentioned that. I don't know how much Baltimore is actually going to be able to run the ball when they look at the score at the first half and they're down 3 touchdowns or something.
Yeah, and if we're moving to running back. Anyway, I think Buck Allen is a guy that catches the ball too. So I think he makes for Pittsburgh's really good against running backs, but pass catching running backs are a slightly different animal. So I think you can get some benefit from Clausen to Allen in the passing game too.
Yeah, 4,200 on DraftKings. I think it makes a lot of sense here, and I think people are. It could be a little bit of a under ownership situation here because just 0.8 fantasy points on DraftKings last week. People are like pretty disappointed. He only 4 rushing attempts. I believe he did cough up the ball maybe twice. I believe I'm not looking at the box score exactly. I'm looking at his individual game log and didn't have it here on PFF. But I actually believe that like swing passes and screens and that sort of thing fall into the pass coverage category, even though people like to sort of consider it as a function of the run game, which in real football terms, I think that it is. But when we're talking about passing defensive grades, that has to fall under the coverage category. You would agree in terms of pass coverage versus the run?
Yeah, it's a hybrid thing. I don't know that it falls into one. I don't know how I would categorize it specifically. I think it's like a hybrid situation.
I'm talking about like specifically for like PFF grading purposes. I think when like the ball gets thrown out to the wing, and either you defend that well or you don't defend that well, and how well you do in that spot probably falls into a part of your overall pass coverage grade. Is what I'm thinking. Okay, because you have to define it as a pass. All right, so we're looking at the top options here at the running back position. Devontae Freeman back up top here again. The price comes down just a little bit for him this week. Good performance, 23 fantasy points. So basically, if you didn't own Devontae Freeman or David Johnson, you had a tough time making some cash here in DFS for particularly David Johnson. And we'll get to him in a few moments there. But Devontae Freeman, take a look at the price here. He was the high watermark was 8,400 as of November 22nd. We're here a month later, and he's down to 7,400. Are you any concerns about the Carolina matchup? He is the top projected running back for Week 16 in the PFF optimizer.
Definitely, I have concerns. Carolina is a great defense. They're going to definitely come to play, I think, because if they're going to have this undefeated season, I think they're going to really have to stop Devontae Freeman. I think he's probably the biggest threat, and they know it. So I'm really not interested in paying up. And this is a pretty common theme. Running back is not easy this week. There's nothing that you feel really super warm and fuzzy about in terms of rostering a running back, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think David Johnson is like the lock talk play, especially on DraftKings because he hasn't been price adjusted up high enough. Just 5,800. So that's why you see him projected in the top 4 here on PFF. Just as of a note, as far as good as the Carolina defense has been, they are currently grading out 17th against the run. So, and I was actually a little bit surprised by that because I thought they would, because of the season they had and their good overall defense, they'd be a little bit higher, especially with Luke Kuechly there on that roster. But they've really just dominated in terms of pass coverage. Number 1 overall with a 50.7 pass coverage grade. And that's what's sort of boosted their defense to 3rd overall in the league. When I saw the 3rd overall tag, I was like, all right, that's probably a top 10 run defense and definitely a top, pass coverage unit with Josh Norman there. But maybe there's some opportunity for Devontae Freeman in that aspect and why he comes in projected a hair above Adrian Peterson this week at 22.8 fantasy points on DraftKings versus 21.8. Speaking of Adrian Peterson here.
He did not do well against them a couple weeks ago.
Okay, fair enough. So I think we're sort of in the same camp. Just depends if you really want to spend up to that price point or if you feel better about the value options. Speaking of the high-priced options, Adrian Peterson just $100 cheaper, is battling that ankle injury from last week, but he did re-enter the game. I think he's been limited in practice, but all the reports all week long is saying he's playing. Any concerns here? Is he too pricey for you? I think you definitely like the matchup against the Giants, but you're paying what, 1,600 more from David Johnson, who also is one of the top options this week at the RB position. How do you handle this?
The thing with Peterson, I think Minnesota's pretty secure in their wild card spot, and I know they're going to want him healthy for the playoffs. So if there's any discomfort or if the passing game is working really well, I could see Adrian Peterson being kind of worked out of the game plan a little bit more, like maybe staying active, but not really being like the workhorse relied upon running back. I actually like the Bridgewater Diggs side of this Vikings matchup a lot better than Peterson. I just think he's a little bit risky. I don't think they're playing for enough right now to warrant risking losing him for the playoffs.
I agree with you there as well. So I have concerns there in terms of, factoring the ankle injury, taking a look at Jerick McKinnon, who was fine in the relief role. He wasn't bad. He was actually a little bit of a factor, made some plays out of the backfield there as well. So, without a ton to play for, I could definitely see the game flow going into like a, 14 carries for 60 yards or something like that. And maybe you get a touchdown, maybe you don't. So, especially when we saw that Teddy Bridgewater, once he was, sort of pushed into action in the pass game, and he finally looked like he was beginning to get on track once again here in his last game. So I actually liked Stephon Diggs as a cheaper option too. I think people sort of fell off the bandwagon there for the last 3-4 weeks or so, and this spot
really
against
bad matchups.
Yeah,
they faced some really tough defenses in that stretch.
Right. And, it's Christmas, and it's also the New York Giants. So I believe that matchup for the Giants, 29th, just right below the Pittsburgh Steelers in terms of pass coverage overall. So you could definitely make some hay. And I believe I saw Stephon Diggs pop up. Yep, he looks, I'm just going to roughly guess, top 15 cornerback wide receiver matchup on Mike Clay's chart this week. So all signs pointing towards a big day for Diggs.
Although the one sign that doesn't, Mike Clay is not a Stephon Diggs fan. We talked about him this morning. We have a little side bet on Diggs and the Vikings this week.
We're going against your own analysis, Mike. It's your chart, buddy.
It's your chart.
Well, it's good to know he's unbiased in his, statistical formulas, I guess, So the matchup says it's good. His gut says otherwise.
Nope, he's believing in the edge corners for the Giants is what
I learned my lesson. I'm telling you right now. There will be no more bows from me on this show. All right. So if you like it, I like it too. That's what I'm going with. But personally, yeah, I think that given what you are going to need to pay for Stephon Diggs, I know that we were actually still talking about wide receivers here. I just wanted to reference the price here. 4,400 on DraftKings, super cheap. That's a great value. Okay. All right, back to running backs here. We've talked about the top two options here. D'Angelo, Baltimore, 6,500. Yay, nay?
No, I don't like taking running backs in Baltimore, against Baltimore. Their run defense is really good at home, and I think Pittsburgh is just it's going to be Ben Roethlisberger all day, in my opinion. Running backs have not fared well in Baltimore this season.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out too, because I felt like you could maybe pick your spot with almost anybody on offense, and if they got out to a lead, then this could be like some fourth quarter D'Angelo work going on. But yeah, fourth overall in the league, which is very surprising given their record. That Baltimore is that good against the run. So yeah, they've done a fair amount of run stuffing. That's really surprising too, because you look at Denver, Kansas City Chiefs, New York Jets, and then you have the Ravens and Rams. I guess I can still consider Texans a potential playoff team there. So that's 4 out of the top 6 are all playoff teams, and then you have Baltimore right in there at fourth. So
yeah, and their record at home is even better. So
yeah. Okay, interesting to know. I'm glad that you pointed that out. Denard Robinson, shoelace 5,400 at New Orleans. I saw that sneer. It was like she decided to go against the eye roll and went with a sneer instead. Okay. I'm in the shoelace camp one more time this week. Let's hear about why you're not.
I don't know. Like Sharkhandrick West is the same price, and I like the matchup. I like the talent. I don't believe in Denard Robinson. I don't think he's that good.
Okay, well, I mean, the 2
8
yards
last week, fantastic. I don't think he gets 8 receptions again, but
yeah, he was definitely a big factor in the passing game. 10 targets, 846. did nothing to speak of in terms of the run game with Atlanta, 14 for 28 at 2 yards per carry. But before that, 2 weeks ago, 5.4 yards and a touchdown with 14 carries and 17 yards. So, and then he was a non-factor in the passing game, just 1 for 12. So it's really sort of a little bit hard to predict what you can expect out of him. I'm just going to have some shares because it's still a reasonable price, and it's a plus matchup against New Orleans.
It really is. Running back is difficult. Yeah. And all of these guys are kind of in the same boat for me. David Johnson's better option than the rest in this price range, but
yes.
I like West. I like Latavius Murray at home against San Diego. The real situations that I wanted to or would have wanted to take advantage of are Buffalo against Dallas and Detroit against San Francisco. And those are both kind of low-end timeshare situations with Carlos Williams and Mike Gillislee. Is it Gill or Jill?
I think it's Gillislee, but I'll try to research it while we talk about this really quick here. Yeah, because if Carlos Williams was completely healthy, which is a little bit concerned. I know he's probable with a shoulder, but this is a guy who's left multiple games this season with injuries. And I think his running style too. I mean, he's an explosive guy, but he's not a guy that avoids contact either. So that's one sort of knock against him. And Amir Abdullah is a guy who's been a sort of a sneaky play, but as long as Theo Riddick is there, it's always sort of like, capped his value overall. And that the crazy thing too is like Amir Abdullah can play that role as well. But when you have somebody that's been as productive as Theo Riddick is, then you have that time share situation, which is why I have to put the arrow up on Denard Robinson in that same case there. There's no
competition.
Yeah, exactly. No one got a single touch. It was Blake Bortles with, I think, 4 or 5 carries, and then the other 14 carries all went to Denard Robinson. No third down back to speak of either. Who am I thinking about that came over from Minnesota? He's terrible. They signed him as a running back.
Is Yada?
No. He's the backup for the Jags. Now third stringer behind Denard Robinson. I've got to look at it's like a Mike Allstott type. Got to look at a depth chart now. This is going to drive me insane.
Jonas Gray?
Not Jonas Gray.
He is there. He is there now.
He was drafted as Adrian Peterson's backup. AFC.
Not available on DraftKings.
DraftKings did you a favor.
Unless Joe Banyard?
No.
Those are the only Jacksonville running backs available on DraftKings.
Oh, he's not on the roster anymore. So, yeah, Jonas Gray and Joe Banyard are the only ones. Okay, no wonder why I can't think of anymore. He is a Caucasian, and he signed a 3-year deal. He was drafted, and for 3 seasons played behind Adrian Peterson, and then Jacksonville signed him to be their feature back, and then he lost the job really quickly because he was terrible, and then it was shoelace the rest of the season. That was last season.
I can vaguely remember. Yeah.
He's so bad that we can't even remember his name.
Right.
All right. All right. You know what I'm gonna do? I'll dig up a 2014 Jags roster just because now we both have to know. But let's talk about a couple of other time splits here. Danny Woodhead and Donald Brown is another situation here that you've got one guy in the passing game. Donald Brown performed well with Melvin Gordon leaving the game early last week in Week 15 here. Any interest in either one of those 2 running backs?
No, thank you. I mean, I'm a Woodhead fan. I've been a Woodhead fan for a long time, but I mean, what happened last week was a total fluke. I think somebody tweeted this morning that he actually played fewer snaps. It was his fewest snaps that he played in any game of the entire season. That was just completely flukish, and I don't think we can expect it again. Phillip Rivers knows him. It's not like Phillip Rivers is like, oh, wow, hey, this guy can actually be productive in this offense. He's known it for years. They've been productive together. And for whatever reason, he's just not being used that consistently. I don't suspect that there's going to be a sudden shift in that kind of, game philosophy. And Danny Woodhead is going to see 20 targets and have 5 touchdowns.
Yeah, you know what? I agree with you on the Donald Brown front for sure. The one thing I will say is I think there can actually be some game flow for Danny Woodhead here in Week 16 because Khalil Mack is an absolute monster. I think, and the San Diego Chargers come in with the worst I think, pass blocking offensive line in the NFL according to PFF. Yes, they're last by a wide margin. So if there's going to be a lot of heat on Phillip Rivers, maybe the game script calls for outlet passes or screens to Woodhead to sort of relieve the pressure off of Khalil Mack, who figures to be in his face all day. That's the only scenario where I could say, okay, I could see Danny Woodhead not repeating last week's performance, but still being like a PPR factor.
Sure, it always is.
Right, absolutely. So flex play option in your GPPs, not going to trust them enough for cash. Any other running backs that we would need to talk about before we move on to wide receiver?
There's no one really. No.
Oh, you know what? I wanted to not gloss over my lock play on Grinders Live yesterday, and who you mentioned here, Charkandrick West. Single best matchup I think that we can come up with here. Some people are a little bit concerned about Spencer Ware coming back into the lineup. I'm not so much. I still think it'll be at least 65-35 or 70-30, maybe more. I actually tried to go a little bit deeper and do my best Jeff Ratcliffe impression with all the IDP analysis that he's so good at. And you take a look at the starting linebacking core, both safeties, and the defensive tackle for Cleveland. All of them have negative individual run defense grades. And Danny Shelton is the worst of them. He's in the bottom 12, and that's where the run defense starts, and that's what they drafted him for, and why the Cleveland Browns are still dead last against the run by a huge margin. Actually, almost 14 points worse in terms of defensive run grade than the San Diego Chargers. So I'm going to have huge exposure to Charkandrick West. If you want to take a flyer on Spencer Ware in a GPP and hope that he turns in like a week 2 Bilal Powell performance when the game's well in hand with Kansas City and he gets some extra run when they've got a huge lead down in the fourth quarter, I'm okay with that. I'm probably not going to really go out of my way to do so myself, but Charkandrick West and David Johnson are two of my more popular cash and GPP options this week. All right, we can move on to the wide receiver position here. What can Brown do for you? How about be the only elite play on the board this week in my mind with Odell Beckham on the sidelines here? Agree or disagree?
Yes, agreed. Well,
okay.
No, I think Allen Robinson is also elite. He's just not priced as high.
Okay. Do you feel like he has the same ceiling? I understand the matchup. It's crazy, but and he did put up like a 46-point performance on DraftKings against Tennessee, 10 for 51 and 3 yards. The projection says for PFF, we have him at 18.2. Antonio Brown, a full 5.5 points higher than everybody else in this roster. So to me, I just feel like the floor and the ceiling are just like 2 notches higher for Antonio Brown versus Allen Robinson. Maybe the ceiling could be in the same area with Antonio Brown, but I don't feel like the floor is the same. Is that a fair analysis?
Yep.
Okay, fair enough. Alshon Jeffrey, I don't know if this is something that I just didn't catch the first time around in the PFF optimizer, but number 2 overall over Julio Jones, over D-Hop, over Allen Robinson, Martavis Bryant, and Jarvis Landry. Do you agree with him at 7,200 as a number 2 wide receiver option for Week 16?
If he was healthy, I would all day. He was like number 4 matchup last week, but he's not. He's not healthy. He's dealing with a range of injuries. So it's a risk. I like him. I like his role on the team. He's clear wide receiver 1, tons of talent, fights hard, plays hard, and has a good matchup, but he gets hurt.
Yeah, and it is a little concerning. And sort of just to give you a little background on why the game log looks as bad as it does last week, just 5 targets, 1 reception, but that 1 reception was a touchdown, so saved you from an absolute donut. But he left the game last week with that hamstring injury, and then returned, I believe, somewhere in the late third quarter or fourth quarter, back into action. So has been, I think, limited for the most part, but does expect to play. If he gets active, I think that there's just too good of a matchup for me to pass up overall. I'm probably not going to go with a ton of exposure. And if you have concerns about the injury, does that mean for you excludes cash, GPP
yes,
only?
Totally.
Okay. I'm in the same camp there as well. I would rather just pay the extra $300 for Allen Robinson and feel better about a guy who's
Mike
not
Evans on the other side of this one. I'd pay $100 more for Mike Evans.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, I have concerns about Mike Evans.
Yeah, there's 1,000 other options. You don't have to take that risk.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, but I want to get into this here for a little bit because Britt loved Mike Evans. He told me Jeff Radcliffe pumped him into Mike Evans, and he didn't take the advice. Now he feels bad because Mike Evans came up with the performance that you're sort of looking for in that last matchup. 27.7 points, 17 targets, 9 for 157. Looks great. Why the Vincent Jackson out of the lineup there again? My concern here is that the uneven level of production. Like New Orleans was a much better matchup than the Rams last week, and he comes up with 3 for 39. And with on 4 targets. Atlanta, we know Desmond Trufant. I don't know how much he was on Mike Evans. I would have to figure he was on him probably a fair amount. And then the Indianapolis Colts, I know that's a road matchup there, but that was another plus matchup there as well. Just 5 for 64. So I definitely GPP only for me. If people want to buy in again this week against Chicago, I don't think Chicago is actually that necessarily that bad against the pass. Remember, Chicago 21st. So in the bottom half of the league for sure. Not a bad matchup to try to take advantage of. I just feel like I can come up with other combinations of options for, as an example, Larry Fitzgerald at home against Green Bay for 7,100 is a matchup I would prefer over a guy like Mike Evans. And maybe that's a little bit stretching it because, there's 3 good wide receiver options in Arizona. And right now there's only 1 in Tampa Bay. But having said that, if I had to choose between the 2, I would take Fitz. How are you setting up the rest of this roster here with the wide receivers? We talked about some of these top options here: Antonio Brown, Alshon Jeffrey. Who else is making your lineup this week?
I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to go at wide receiver. It's like the opposite of running back this week. Sammy Watkins is a good option against Dallas, I think, playing at home. There's no Robert Woods there. And I think I wrote up Chris Hogan as like a deep desperation value play at minimum salary for
7-11. Do you remember Chris Hogan at 7-11? And I don't know if you caught him in Hard Knocks when he was with the Miami Dolphins. Yeah, that was the Chad Johnson season where he choked at his fiance or whatever and got cut from the Dolphins. And that was like why it was must-see TV. Nobody really actually wanted to know what was happening with the Dolphins roster. They just wanted to know how the coach handled Ocho Cinco getting kicked off the team. Yeah. But Chris Hogan was the guy who was, I think, a practice squad or a training camp invite, and they called him 7-11 because he was always open in practice. So yeah, it didn't end up sticking on the roster, but now he's a regular fixture in the slot for the Buffalo Bills. So a guy that I like mainly because of that show. But I like him as a cheap play. I actually think he's like a better version of Cole Beasley. Is that a fair comp for him? Oh, okay. Any other wide receiver options? We talked about Stephon Diggs as a good cheap play here. Who else is going to be in the bargain basement area for you this week?
In the mid-range, before we leave the mid-range, obviously Martavis Bryant, but also Emmanuel Sanders. I wrote him up last week. I wrote him up again this week. He's got another good matchup. Denver's at home. Osweiler's clearly building some trust with him, and he can be that kind of high-volume PPR guy that just racks up the catches and yards. It almost doesn't matter if he scores or not. So 180 is probably a little optimistic this week, but 110 fully in his wheelhouse, I think.
All right.
In the cheap range, I already mentioned Curse, or maybe not? We talked a little bit about Seattle and Russell Wilson, and the way this game I think goes is very pass heavy production in the first half, maybe a little bit more reliance on the run game in the second half, and that we didn't talk about Kristen Michael, but we
did not
a bunch of 84 rushing yards last week, and figures to play that same role again if the Seahawks get off to a big lead, which they should, and take advantage of that running back defense correlation maybe this week with Michael. Cheap running or cheap wide receivers. I'm sticking more in the mid range with my receivers. I don't know. Aiken's not super cheap, but
I'm going to go back to the well one more time with a guy that I wrote up last week for PFF here at Jermaine Kearse. The price really has not adjusted at all with
That's
two back to
Huh? I talked about him for a minute.
Did we Jermaine Kearse?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I completely missed that. Yeah, but for whatever reason, he comes up with two back-to-back strong performances, and the price goes down.
Right.
On DraftKings, which is always weird to me. I understand that there should be some adjustment for, the defensive matchup there, but when you performing quite well, maybe you should just hold the price rather than giving him a $300 discount.
No touchdowns in the past 3 weeks. That's why
DraftKings is so crazy with the pricing. It really is like, you feel like you got like $100 and you're shopping at the swap meet or something like that. You can buy like 40 things, and like FanDuel and Yahoo is like trying to shop at Nordstrom. You're like, I can get one good thing and that's it. Then I got to buy socks.
So yeah, Curse is dealing with some kind of calf injury, so make sure that he's active. But he's been a big part of this offense, even though Doug Baldwin gets all the touchdowns and all the accolades. Curse is about as cheap as I'll go.
All right. I think that's going to cover it for me too. Okay.
Deshaun Jackson.
Oh yeah.
This week.
Deshaun Jackson's a guy that we talked about yesterday as well. Sort of flown under the radar too, because I don't think people give Kirk Cousins or the Washington Redskins in general enough credit. Everybody's been talking about Jordan Reed and how consistent he's been all season. And, Jamison Crowder was like the popular, under-owned, slot option when he was filling him well. Different guys were injured. Yeah. So Marcus Wheaton too, by the way, at 4,100. If you feel like there's going to be a lot of scoring, like we've talked about, and I think we all do, I'm still fine with him too. 11 targets, 6 for 62 and a score. What's priced here at 4,100. So DraftKings actually did the right thing here and raised the price up a fair amount, but he's still pretty valuable, or a great value in terms of price.
Yeah, Marcus Wheaton is part of the reason why I definitely want a lot of shares of Ben Roethlisberger, and I'll have fewer of Antonio Brown, because it just, it really ruins your week when Marcus Wheaton outscores Antonio Brown.
Okay, fair enough. I don't know if that's going to be the case this week. What what I want to do?
I doubt it, but
I never do this. Okay, like never. But I might actually just fit in like all three receivers into a GPP and then just see how it all plays out. Like it's just complete stacks. If you feel like he's going to go nuts against Baltimore, and it is a game that the Pittsburgh Steelers do need to win, then maybe you can just cover all your bases. And I don't think any of them has like a floor that's so bad that creates a hole in your lineup that isn't going to cash. So something to consider. Like we said, all three wide receivers ranked on Mike Clay's chart in the top 50 for week 16. All right, it is time for America's favorite game, Renee. It's Tight End King of the Hill. Are you ready?
I am.
All right, we will start it off with Zach Ertz, priced at 3,100 against Washington, and Britt Devine's GPP cheapie of the week. I really like this call. It's Will Tye at 3,500.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Will Tye. I've written about him the past 2 weeks, and he made it into my bargain article again. Like, I don't like to be that redundant with my picks, but his price really hasn't risen at all. And he's caught touchdowns in the last 2 games. He's been very efficient with his targets, and his targets share has increased even with Odell Beckham Jr. present. So yes. I think he's going to absorb a lot of those targets. Ruben Randall, I mean, it's like the most boring play you could do, but he's also going to see an increase in action. But I like Tye.
I like Tye as well. You take a look at the game log too. 7 or more targets in 3 out of the past 5 games. And like you said, great targets efficiency. 8 targets, 6 catches, 4 targets, 3 catches, 5 and catches all 5. And then the worst he did was last week against the Panthers with 8 targets and 5 receptions. And that was still good for 15.3 DraftKings points, which is his high water mark in the past 5 weeks there as well. And I think it's an absolute spot here where I will not be surprised at all one bit if Will Tye outscores Ruben Randall this week for fantasy. Could you see that happening?
I could see it. It's somewhat unlikely, but
okay. All right. So that's going to be my bold call of the week. Maybe people feel like Ruben Randall is going to get all the targets, and he probably should. But we'll see how that ends up playing out. So Will Tye gets the first round win. He is now up against Jason Witten at Buffalo, 3,900.
I've written about Witten this week too, which is funny because I was just talking to a friend about how Witten is totally off the list for me. He's like, it's just been totally off my radar. But Kellen Moore is playing quarterback for Dallas, and he is, I think, in somewhat of like an auditioning position for the end of the season. Like he wants to impress his coaches and his teammates. And I think a good way for him to go about that would be to target Witten kind of heavily. So Witten's been very, I'd say, underutilized, and he's older. Sure, he's probably nearing the end of his career, but he's still really efficient with tight ends that have at least 30 receptions. He has the highest catch rate of all of them with 78% catch rate. So I think Moore will be smart to target Witten often in this game. And I think he has maybe his best game since week 1.
Okay. For me, so is that Jason Witten beating Will Tye here in round 2? Okay. I would have gone with Will Tye, but you already know that I'm a little bullish on him. But I could see that definitely happen. And I'm actually a Kellen Moore fan too. I actually felt like he never should have gotten cut from the Detroit roster because to me he was better than Dan Orlovsky, who somehow magically continues to hold on to the number 2 quarterback role. Didn't do me any favors throwing for 3 picks after, I felt the way I felt, but at least I didn't put it out there in public, like on this show until now. So I am still like quietly rooting for him. I've liked him ever since he was at Boise State. And I sort of feel like, these guys who aren't prototypical 6'4", 6'5", 225 or whatever quarterbacks like Kellen Moore is not, sort of get a little bit of a bad rap because, they don't, project with the ideal arm strength or height, weight, and size. So we'll see if he can end up winning that job. Jason Witten or Heath Miller, 3,400.
Witten again.
Okay. Jason Witten or Travis Kelce, 4,300.
I'll stick with Witten.
All right. I'm glad you said that because Travis Kelce is my tight end fade of the week. Cleveland Browns have 3 linebackers who have a top 17 or higher coverage grade in the NFL. So that's one thing they do well. They don't do anything really well on defense except cover the tight end from the linebacker position. So their linebackers, they know how to do one thing, and it's do well in pass coverage. So that's bad for Travis Kelce. Zach Miller, another popular option for me in season long, 4K at Tampa Bay. Good matchup. Him or Jason Witten?
I'll stick with Witten.
All right. I would have gone Zach Miller there.
Also, when Jeffrey was out, I would be more interested in Miller.
Okay. I think it's razor thin, and I would give the slight edge to Zach Miller for the better quarterback play. Gary Barnidge, 4,700, or Jason Witten?
I don't target anyone against the Chiefs.
All right. That sounds like a no. Okay. Delaney Walker, 5,600 at home against Houston, or Jason Witten?
Delaney Walker is matchup proof.
Been pretty good.
It's got to be Walker. He's the top option on this team, and
yeah. Well, here's a potential reason for coming off the Delaney Walker train. Okay, and granted, you're completely correct. Okay,
if Mariota doesn't play.
Yes, exactly. Zach Mettenberger, sorry, no faith whatsoever in that guy. Mariota and Mettenberger are night and day in my mind. Not to say that he should still treat Delaney Walker as his safety valve.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. I hadn't followed this news well enough to know that he was completely out. Yeah, I thought he was still questionable. My bad. Okay. So yeah, I'll stick with Witten.
All right, fair enough. It's a good way to get me to stop talking.
You could have just said Mariota's out.
Okay. All right, here we go. This is where it gets really interesting. Antonio Gates in the plus matchup, or Jason Witten. Tony Gates 5K on the road at Oakland.
I'll take Gates. The price hike should be worth it. He's getting a lot of targets. He's continuing to be the top receiving option on this team, and like you said, it's the matchup that everyone wants with the Oakland Raiders. So
right. As you put me onto here, second most fantasy points allowed to the tight end position, the Oakland Raiders there as well. So They seem like they sort of corrected the issue for a few weeks here, but overall for the season, still very, very bad. Still very, very good for Antonio Gates, which also means that he's behaving himself, like you talked about last week, like a wide receiver. So as long as he continues to behave in that faction, he's my lock cash game play over everybody. I'll just put it out there right now. Like I had the question, do I want anybody else up top or Antonio Gates? I was just based on price and matchup. How can you not? Yep. Another guy who's been making it interesting here, Ben Watson at 5,300 against Jacksonville or Gates.
I'm going to stick with Gates there, mainly because I don't know how good Breeze is going to be.
True. Very true. Yeah.
I want to hear more about how Breeze progresses through the week before I trust anyone in the Saints offense.
All right. For devil's advocate's sake, let's just say he gets cleared and he's playing. That's the news. Does that change your mind about Ben Watson this week? I'm
still going to stick with Gates personally, but I like Ben Watson. I mean, he's won King of the Hill with me before, so okay, I would understand that. It's also a good matchup for Watson.
23 targets, 13 catches, and a touchdown in the last week, 2 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks. So, yeah, definitely been productive in the short term. Julius Thomas is my GPP special this week. He is a top 4 projected tight end for PFF. 5,100 for Thomas or Antonio Gates?
51 for Thomas, and he's also my contrarian tight end play from yesterday's article, mainly for the point of people will not want to have too many Jaguars in their lineup, and most people are going to want to have Allen Robinson in their lineup. So I think that Thomas, everyone will recognize his good matchup and just not want too much exposure to the Jaguars. I think he's the biggest touchdown threat. He could easily have 2 this week, so I'll take Thomas.
Yeah, Thomas has been super productive. There are touchdowns in 4 straight games up until last week against the Falcons, and he still went with 9 targets, 6 catches, 79 yards, good for almost 14 fantasy points on DraftKings, which is great value at 4,700. You got what you paid for the last 5 weeks or more from Julius Thomas. Jordan Reed, I'm sorry, was that Julius Thomas beating Antonio Gates in that spot? Okay, Julius Thomas or Jordan Reed for 6,500.
That price is a lot. It's a lot to pay. And I know the production has been there. I know the Eagles, I like it. I'm fine with it if you can afford him. But with so many higher end wide receivers or, mid to high priced wide receivers that I want, I'm not really been able to do it.
Yeah, I think
that's the only drawback I have. I'm sure he has another really solid game. I wrote about him.
Yeah, 1,400 is fairly cost prohibitive. When you know that you have a good bet at similar production from Julius Thomas, Ben Watson, and Antonio Gates, or a minimum 1,200 cheaper than him. So that's my only issue. I'm 100%.
Yeah, I think you get similar production for less, but he's been terrific. He's been amazing. Yes.
Absolutely. To me, I don't know. Did he make the Pro Bowl team? Because if he didn't, it's a snub for sure. So
I don't know.
I don't know either. We just work here. So Greg, like Pro Bowl rosters not in our job description right now. Greg Olsen 7K or Julius Thomas?
I hate when it gets at this point because it's all a price consideration,
right? Mm-hmm.
So I got to stay with Thomas, but
yeah, we're going up 1,900 from Julius Thomas for a receiver. I mean, that's projected for less than 2.9 points higher this week on PFF than the optimizer. 2K is not worth 2 points or 3 points. In my mind, does Greg Olsen have a better, higher ceiling? Sure. Has he outperformed Julius Thomas on the season? Yes, especially given the health concerns that Julius Thomas had. I won't pay it. Okay. And then we get to the top option.
The Falcons 2 weeks ago.
Right.
And that's one game, small sample, whatever. But Atlanta's, they're going to play him tough.
Yeah, I agree there as well. 2 weeks ago, 4 targets, 3 receptions, 52 yards. You were pretty upset that you paid 6,900 and that's all you got. So Rob Gronkowski, 7,600 at the Jets. The only only person like in the Patriots wide receiver core that's like living and breathing right now that isn't on an incubator or have an IV or getting wrapped in 4 different places in the training room right now. High price to pay, obviously always a great play whenever you can afford him. Is 7,600 too much, or is the production still enough for him to beat out Julius Thomas?
I think that he's the safer bet. So I'll go with Gronk.
Okay,
if you're going to pay more than Gates and Thomas at 5,000 and 5,100, do it for Gronk.
Okay, all right. That's the first time I remember Gronk winning tight end King of Hill.
No, sometimes we excluded him because he was going to win.
Right. Yeah, you're like, okay, it's not even close this week. Yeah. But these tight ends, they're like, we're talking about from like Delaney Walker on up. You've got some top performing tight ends in a range of values from 5K all the way to 7,600. So I think you can make a case for all of them. And if I was firing up, multiple GPP lineups, I would make sure I had each one of those players from Antonio Gates, Watson, Thomas, Reed, Olsen, Gronkowski, all the way up into various lineups to sort of spread out my risk and make sure I got the top option for the week and into a GPP.
Mm-hmm. Right, and using the second tight end in your flex is not a bad idea this week either.
I totally agree with you as well, especially when you have target monsters like Jordan Reed and Antonio Gates, who have been hitting 10 plus targets on the regular. That's like a wide receiver.
Yeah.
All right, we come to defense to put a bow on this show here, Renee. Who are your top options to slam your picket fence down, play some defense this week?
I mean, the obvious, the two that I like the best are the Chiefs at home against Cleveland. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, it might be a tie for who I like second. Seattle, Cincinnati, and the Lions.
Okay. The Lions against San Francisco. That's one of the cheaper options. That's right, a little bit off the board there as well. If I can find Dallas on this board here. Who is Dallas playing again? Buffalo. This is so bad. Oh, yes. But Buffalo at home. They're 3,200. They're not one of the top projected players on the board, but anytime you get to a quarterback situation like Mettenberger in Tennessee, Kellen Moore there as well, I think it's a matchup to take advantage of there as well. I also on the flip side of that too.
You think you use Dallas's defense in the road? Is that what you were saying?
No, I'm going to use Buffalo against Dallas.
Oh, Buffalo against Dallas at home. Yeah.
Okay.
I like that.
That's like
stop the show.
yeah, that's
you're not using Dallas's defense.
Yeah. I don't want to set my money completely on fire. And the flip side of that too, if you want to go Tennessee with Brandon Weeden for in that matchup, I'm okay with Houston at 2,800, and I'm okay with the other side of that there as well. I mean, we're getting down to the point here where Tennessee, if Brian Hoyer plays, then I'm no longer interested.
Exactly.
Okay? I know that he's been cleared to practice, but not cleared to play yet. So that changes things for me. But if it's going to be Brandon Weeden back in the lineup, then I have no problem at all with a share or two of the Tennessee defense, especially at, I think, min price.
Yeah, 2,000.
Yeah, so that'll be the absolute difference for me, whether I would use him or stay away completely. Any other options that we need to discuss before we move on?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think we covered it sufficiently. So there you have it. And that's going to wrap it up for today's show. What do you have coming up here for the rest of the week? I know it's Christmas Eve, so a lot of people are sort of taking the rest of the weekend off. Are you in that camp? Any more articles coming out?
I have my article on PFF will be out. The rest of the stuff should be out. My Flex articles up at ESPN. My 2 articles that I do at RotoWorld are up at the RotoWorld Daily tab. And I will have my PFF DraftKings plays probably Saturday morning.
Yeah, I have my PFF article coming out this Saturday
too. Tomorrow.
Right. So
the stars are
I think the majority of the fantasy world is taking the rest of the weekend off, except PFF. Christmas is not a holiday on PFF. We're still rolling out articles like it's Wednesday in September. So be sure to check out all the content. We're going to have everything that you need to get your Week 16 lineups, top contrarian plays, lineups, updated depth charts with all the matchups there. The Shadow Report, I believe, from Mike Clay is out also there as well. So a lot of great content for Week 16. Don't forget, you can always follow Renee Miller on Twitter at ReneeMiller01. You can check me out on Twitter at JoshHayesFS. Thanks for watching and listening to today's show, brought to you by DraftKings.com, America's favorite one-week fantasy football site. You can always check us out over on PFF Radio on iTunes, listen on Stitcher, Blog Talk Radio. Watch the show on the official PFF YouTube channel and the Fantasy Sports Network. Thanks, as always, to my co-host, Renee Miller, for our expert analysis here in Week 16. And good luck in all your fantasy matchups, everybody.